Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, monomili wanji, namaste, jumbo. Bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you would join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, wherever you find your podcasts. In today's episode, Jordan Sahley speaks with Nina Varela all about her brand new book, Juniper Harvey and the Vanishing Kingdom. Before we invite Jordan and Nina into the studio, we want to invite you to connect with us on social media. Facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Reading With Your Kids on Instagram, at Jedley Magic on Twitter. Please be sure to check out our Reading With Your Kids channel on YouTube. And of course, we would love for you to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. You can subscribe to our online newsletter. You can find our blog. If you're an author, you can find out how you can submit your book to our Certified Great Read program. And of course, you can use the contact button at the top of the page to let us know what we're doing well, let us know what we could be doing better, and let us know who you would like to hear on a future episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.
Hello, welcome to today's episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. I'm your host, Jordan, for today, and I am joined by Nina Varela. She's here to talk about her book, Juniper Harvey. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, so Juniper Harvey and the Vanishing Kingdom is out on Valentine's Day, February 14th, which is like in 2 weeks. Oh my gosh. And it is a middle grade fantasy about a girl named Juniper who has just moved from Texas to Florida, is starting 6th grade at a new school in a whole new place. She already has a lot on her plate, and then a magical warrior princess from another world shows up in her bedroom and starts yelling at her and waving a sword in her face. And things get more complicated from there. So she quickly learns that this princess has been displaced from her world, is blaming Juniper for it, even though Juniper clearly had nothing to do with this. And she has to figure out a way to get the princess back to her world. And along the way, they start becoming friends, and she realizes that she might be developing a little bit of a crush on this princess who is super cool and super strong and everything that Juniper is not. So they have to battle flying nightmare monsters and also middle school awkwardness and all of the awkwardness of a first crush.
Is there a reason that you chose to release this on Valentine's Day?
Well, I actually did not choose it. That was totally the publishers.
Gotcha.
But I guess they were going for there's a little bit of romance, as much romance can possibly be had when you're an awkward 6th grader.
Yeah.
But it's slightly on theme.
Mm-hmm. No, that's cute. I was thinking that when I saw it on Valentine's Day, I was like, ooh, a love story.
Yeah.
Do you plan on making this into a series, or is this a one-off thing?
Yes, I'm actually working on the sequel right now. I can't really say, honestly, anything about it, but it is a continuation, and it's been really, really fun to work on and going to new places literally with it. So hopefully it'll be fun.
So would you say Juniper is you in a way? Is that how you felt in the 6th grade, or is this a completely different character?
Yeah, well, she's a little bit like me in that she is very artsy and she's introverted and a bit shy. She's having trouble making friends at her new school because she just is so scared to just approach someone, and she just kind of, roly-poly bugs into herself and is a little bit too scared to really make an effort to approach all these new kids. And she, is very much of a daydreamer, very imaginative. She's constantly making up stories for little comics in her head because she loves to draw. She is not like me in that she, is experiencing this first crush, which is, on another girl. And she's aware of that fact, and she's aware that these are crush feelings as opposed to just platonic feelings. And I'm queer. And when I was her age, I did not realize that I was queer. Like I just didn't have, I didn't know that was something that like a kid could be. And so it was really interesting writing the book, and kind of almost entering this alternate universe of what my like middle school experience could have been like if I had realized back then that I was queer, and realized that, these kind of confusingly intense things I was feeling for like a friend or like an acquaintance or whatever were just as real and important as what other kids were feeling, like what other girls were feeling for boys. So yeah, so it was kind of weirdly healing in a way to write it. And just, really diving into this character who is in some ways more sure of herself than I was, but in a lot of ways is still totally lost and totally, messy and upset and having all of these, big, scary puberty feelings. So.
For sure. And like having like the sixth grade crush be presented through a queer lens is so nice for kids who are growing up confused. Because I remember when I was younger, I didn't even know what like being bisexual was until
Right?
college or something. And so in middle school, I was like, what's going on here?
Oh yeah, no, for sure. Like I did not, I knew that, obviously I knew that like being gay was a thing. Like I was in middle school back when like saying something was, that's so gay, was like something that happened a million times per day. So like I knew what it was in that sense. But yeah, I had no idea that it was something that could apply to like a kid my age and that could describe what I was feeling. And yeah, like it wasn't until college that that world really kind of opened up to me, and I started like, questioning the assumptions that I had just left unquestioned about my gender and my sexuality and all of that stuff. But yeah, but like, not to be like kids these days, but kids these days have so much more access to information about these things, just due to the internet and social media. And so like now you have like my youngest sibling is just turned 15. And for years, they've had like this big friend group where kids, self-identify as like trans or non-binary or gay or whatever it is. And that's just like unthinkable to me, and I'm only like 12 years older than my sibling. So it's really just changed so much in so short of a time, just between like, younger millennial generation and like now Gen Z. So yeah, so it was really cool trying to tap into that and write about kids who just are so much more knowledgeable about these things than I was at that age.
Yeah, the change is honestly awesome. I remember I went from a hometown where saying gay was like an insult, and then I came here to Boston and I go to Emerson where like the straight population is like so rare. I would say it's like even more of an insult to be like, what are you, a hetero? Like
I know, like being like the token straight friend.
Yeah.
No, exactly.
I'm out straight
like
here and it's beautiful. That's what I mean. But yeah, it's so awesome to see like more literature for like younger kids so that they can grow up knowing that's normal and that's no different than any other crush in the sixth grade.
Yeah, exactly.
What made you decide to make it take place in Florida? Because I remember as soon as I saw like a queer person in Florida, I was like, that doesn't feel like it's gonna end well, especially that we're there right now.
Yeah, it's super weird because I mean, obviously Florida has never had a great track record in terms of like, how they approach queerness and queer kids especially. But I started writing this like in the early days of like 2020. And so that was like right before, a lot of Florida laws started really getting set into motion. Like I had already finished writing the book by the time, like last year when DeSantis signed the Don't Say Gay law into effect. And now, like just recently in the past few weeks, there's been so many headlines about how hard they're cracking down on book bans and censorship, and just, censoring so many more books, and especially books. I think it's like 41% of the censored books have LGBTQ themes, like 40% feature, characters of color. And so a lot of this, this sort of moral panic about queerness, but especially queerness in relation to children, that's been kind of simmering since the 90s has really started to boil over, like in the past couple of years alone. Um, and so it was definitely super weird writing this book set in Florida. And then kind of after I'd finished it, Florida was like constantly in the news for specifically, homophobic and transphobic, laws and bills. So yeah, it's awful to think about because I mean, there's like this book is set in Florida. There's a chance that it would totally be censored in Florida and would not be allowed to, be in libraries or in schools or getting to kids' hands. And the book itself is escapist. Like, it touches on, obviously the fact that homophobia exists and stuff like that. Like it's not totally from a, head in the sand perspective, but it's an escapist fantasy for kids. It's about going to a magical other world. Like I wanted it to feel like a safe, comforting kind of happy place for any kid, during the couple hours that they're reading it. So yeah, it's been a really complex feeling about that because, these things make me so upset and so angry, and then also so proud and inspired of the kids and students that are, fighting against these censorship laws and are speaking out against them and, rejecting these, horrible crackdowns from the, conservative government. And yeah, so it's just like, I'm mostly just kind of sad that due to the content of this book, there's a chance that they won't really, it won't physically be there in front of them. Because like, as you said, like I wanted to be like relatable and be like this safe place for any queer or questioning or, just regular kids who want to read a fun little romp. So yeah, it's been really, really upsetting to see those headlines. But I do like that the book is set in Florida because, no matter how many laws are introduced, like queer kids exist, queer kids will continue to exist. There's no, like, you can't, there's no denying of that. They're always going to be everywhere. They certainly live in Florida. So I do like that this book, especially like this escapist book is set in Florida. And I just hope that kids are able to read it.
I think it'll still reach a huge audience. I feel like people fail to understand that by taking away these books, it's not making their kids straighter. It's making queer kids feel more separated, and it's making straight kids less empathetic towards people.
Oh yeah.
And it's
yeah
horrifying to watch, but hopefully that'll be resolved someday.
Right now. Well, the kids are fighting against it. I was just reading this article yesterday about like, middle and high school students in Florida who are protesting the censorship. There's a bunch of websites that have links to like, here's all the books that were banned. Here's where you can buy and read them. So, kids are so smart and they're so, and they know when something is unjust. They know when something is wrong. Like the strange thing about these laws is like, as you said, like they seem to think that, kids will just accept it and be like, oh, I guess that's an evil book that I can't read. No, they're gonna, if they want to find it, they're gonna find it.
That's gonna make them want it more. Like I was taking a publishing class and he was talking to the class about how as soon as a book gets banned or it gets sued for something, the like amount of buys just shoot up because people are oh, why is this banned? What's going on here?
Yeah, like what kind of juicy things are in here? And then you find out that like, oh, it's not even like juicy. It's just like a book where the character is gay.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh, okay. I see what's going on here.
Yeah, this isn't as juicy as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
I know another thing I appreciate about your book so much is I feel like a lot of times with like queer relationships and the way they're presented in books and television is it always has to have some sort of tragic ending, like I feel like Call Me by Your Name was so iconic for a while, but like it always is someone has to die, someone like it can't just be happy. And I like that your book isn't all about homophobia or like some tragedy. It's just a fun book with a queer main character.
Yeah. And like, that's the kind of thing that I really love to read. Like those books about homophobia and about things like that absolutely are necessary and have their place because those are realities that all of us are dealing with every single day. And, they have their place on the shelves, but also there's so much to be had in escapism and just like, reading a story where like they're fighting dragons or whatever, but like the people fighting dragons are gay and like their gayness is not the central conflict of the story. It's not the tragedy of the story. Like it's just another fact, same as like, as any heterosexual, character is. And so, yeah, it was really fun to write that where like, and I've written, books for teens as well, which have similar themes where like, there's like a forbidden romance. And this is in my book, Criers War, there's a forbidden romance, but it's not forbidden because they're lesbians. It's forbidden because one of them is a robot and one of them is a human. So there's like, there's just like so much to play with there, where it's important that they're queer and it has to do with the story that informs their characters and how they relate to each other, but it's not the central conflict and it's not something that they're angsting about nearly as much as they're angsting about like, oh my God, I fall in love with a robot. So
Yeah. What made you get into this like sci-fi world of magic and robots and all that kind of stuff?
I mean, I've always been a huge sci-fi fantasy nerd. Like I was a book nerd. I was raised on like Chronicles of Narnia and Lord of the Rings and like literally any book I could get my hands on. I was the kid like hanging out in the library during lunch and reading all of like every single book my parents had in the house and stuff. And I just always loved fantasy worlds. The weirder, the better. And like just how many possibilities exist and how those, those worlds can be used to describe our world. And so I knew that I wanted to write fantasy. Like I love world building. I love coming up with weird, weird magic and just and like, I love, coming up with strange locations. Like oftentimes when I'm starting a story, the first thing that comes into my head won't be like a character or a plot point, or it'll just be like a weird location or like a strange place or a strange vista. And I'll be like, I want to write a story that ends in this place or like that comes to this place. And like, so how do and then I kind of like reverse engineer to make that location happen.
Mm-hmm.
Cause yeah, I'm just like a very visual thinker and I just love thinking about like, weird, incredible things that just kind of take your breath away and really do transport you to this other place and make it seem as real and important as the things around you. And I think especially for books in this age range, like for middle school, kids in middle school, like, middle school sucks for everyone. I don't know of a single person who had a good time in middle school or no one's like, yeah, middle school, that was just a great 4 years of my life when I was going through puberty and going through like, having all of these feelings and just like feeling miserable all the time. And so, it's a prime, time in your life where you want to escape and you want to experience something other than just like feeling awkward and going to school and blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, I was just like reading voraciously when I was that age because I just wanted to experience things that weren't my tiny little world and that weren't, whatever, teenage misery I was feeling at the moment. And I just love stories that immediately transported me to somewhere else. And, especially ones that, remind you that even if magic is not literally real in our world, which, who knows? I'm not a disbeliever. If a ghost showed up in front of me, I would be like, yeah, seems about right. I believe in you for sure. But, stories that make you remember that there is the potential for that kind of thing all around you, or like the magic that you can create through forming relationships and being a part of your community and just like putting good into the world and making good things and making art and just, reminding you that fantasy can exist in the real world. You just kind of have to, make it yourself and put your heart into it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's such a great point about like middle school being such a horrible time for
Oh yeah.
it's like, I feel like that's when all like dystopian novels take off. That's when Marvel took off, at least like in my grade. I remember as soon as I hit like middle school, I was so into comic books, all that kind of stuff, you know, cause it was anywhere but here. Like no one wants to go to the normal world anymore. And like a lot of the authors I interviewed, they were middle school teachers at one point. And they hated it too, because they were surrounded by that little teenage angst, you know? Like,
yeah. Oh, I can't even imagine. Like I was going through it enough and I was just one person. I cannot imagine like being a teacher and like seeing every single kid just like vibrating with, you know, prepubescent misery. And yeah, no, it's like, cause it's exactly that age where like, you're no longer, like you're still a kid, obviously, but you're no longer a little kid. Like you're realizing, you know, you're kind of, and obviously this happens younger for some kids than others, but it is the time of like disillusionment in a way and realizing like, you know, like kind of, oh, this is how the world is going to be. Like I have to go to school and I have to do like more homework than I've ever been used to. And I just have to do all these things that I don't want to do and aren't fun and don't make me feel good. And also I'm dealing with like, you know, puberty hormones and stuff. And I just feel crazy all the time. So yeah, like it is exactly that age where you want to be anywhere else. And you're also realizing you're kind of beginning to lose that sense of magic that you had in childhood and that sense of like, wonder and stuff. And so I really, really love, how middle grade books try to harness that magic and harness that wonder and that curiosity about the world, whether it's our world or a fantasy world. And just give that back to kids who are having a tough time.
Yeah.
Just like, by nature of being 12.
That age is when you stop believing in Santa Claus, when you stop watching magic tricks and start learning how to do them, you know, you realize things are no longer
exactly
magical. So I think fantasy really saves a lot of kids at that age.
Oh, for sure. Me for sure. Yeah.
And were you ever into fan fiction? I've noticed a lot of like younger authors like used to write fan fictions or like read them. I know I was really into it in like middle school.
Oh yeah. Yeah, actually the first time I ever like posted my writing online, it was fan fiction. I think it was for Naruto. I'm pretty sure. I was reading all of this manga. Like I was really into shonen manga like Naruto and Bleach and Inuyasha. I loved anything by Takahashi Rumiko. Like I was just obsessed with like Ranma 1/2. And so I was reading all of these things. And I don't even remember how I learned about it. I think maybe a friend told me, but like somehow I discovered like fanfiction.net. And yeah, that was the first time I started posting my writing online. And it was so validating because, you know, you'd post something and then you'd start like kind of immediately getting comments and stuff, even if it was just like, oh, this is fun, keep going or whatever. Like I just never experienced that sort of instant gratification before, because before that, like my writing had been very private and like, you know, I hadn't really felt the need to share it or like get any feedback or something. And so this was just, fan fiction was such a great way to get feedback and to find a community of like, you know, people who love writing and love the nerdy stuff that you love. And yeah, so I kept writing fan fiction like throughout my teen years, and it's absolutely one of the things that affected my writing the most and made me keep writing even when, you know, I didn't really have many original ideas in my head. Like fan fiction was always there, and you can just slip into a story and slip into the characters, and you don't need to, you know, do all of the world building and scene setting yourself. You can just say, okay, here we are. We're with Naruto. We're in the woods. Here's the story. Let's get into it. And so, yeah, so it was just so nice to have that online community, and to really like learn how to, get into a character's head and how to tailor your voice to a character. Like when people ask for writing advice, my first advice is read poetry, because poetry helps you, you know, it's so much more like creative and nebulous in terms of format than a lot of writing. It just helps you think about words and language in new ways. And then number 2 is read and write fan fiction, because that's often just what will get you writing. If you just want to write about your favorite character, that'll do it. Like you'll, you know, just get those words out and get your practice in. Yeah.
I think fan fiction definitely like tricked a lot of people into getting into writing and reading, just because you start off being like, I want to read more stories about Harry Styles, or I want to write my own story. And then, not speaking from personal things at all.
Oh, of course not. Of course not.
Of course not. I've never read the Larry Styles fan fiction ever, but if I were to, it definitely makes me like, oh, well, I kind of wish this would happen. Oh, well, I guess Harry Styles is no longer the main point of my writing. It's now its own story. And now I feel like I can do it myself. And same with reading. I hated reading until fan fiction, and then suddenly I'm like reading books every single day, and it's not about Harry Styles anymore.
Yeah, because like, you learn how to, first of all, sit down and read something and just like concentrate on reading for a couple hours, like no matter what you're reading. It's like that thing, I think this is something like Terry Crews said, where it was like someone asked for advice on how to, start going to the gym regularly. And he was like, don't start going to the gym and immediately start, trying to run 10 miles and trying to lift like a ton of heavy weights. Just go to the gym and sit there with a magazine for 20 minutes and just put that into your schedule and get used to just like physically going to the gym. And then once you're used to that and once the habit is formed, you can start like actually doing your workouts and stuff. But, the way to get into something without going too hard at first and overwhelming yourself is really just to show up every day. And it's kind of like that for reading and like for struggling readers. Like the most important thing is that you're just reading words on the page if you're first getting into it. Or if you're having trouble, like, you don't want to read like whatever book your class is assigned to you. You just want to read like an easy story about your favorite characters. It absolutely is, a great way to just get people into reading and get them into wanting to like absorb words and read words. So yeah, no, I love fan fiction. I think that like it absolutely has its place, not only as practice for writing, but also just as a genre on its own with its own conventions. But yeah, like that was definitely one of the big places where I started and where I first learned that there was a writing community and there was like, I could, make friends with people and read other people's work and give feedback and incorporate their feedback into my own writing. And I totally recommend it to any like kids, especially, or just anyone wanting to get into writing regularly. It's just like, take your favorite character, imagine a scenario, like what would happen if Batman went to the coffee shop, and then just see what happens in your brain with that. Because, as long as you're getting words on the page, that's awesome.
Yeah. Practice is practice no matter what you're writing.
Yeah.
But for the age you're reaching, which is middle school or early high school, I'm guessing, what do you think these kids could have like conversations about when they read this with their parents? Because on this podcast, we try to encourage like parents and kids to read more together and stuff. Just help that family flow. What kind of conversations do you think could people have?
I think I guess like the kind of the most obvious answer would be about like the queerness factor, about the fact that like it's totally fine and normal to be like an 11-year-old girl with a crush on another girl, or, any permutation of that. But like in terms of the actual story, I would say, it's loosely inspired by the ancient Greek story of Pygmalion and Galatea, which is about a sculptor named Pygmalion who lives on an island. He's very lonely. He desperately wants a wife, but he doesn't like any of the women on his island. He's kind of a jerk, to be honest. And so he uses his sculpting skills to carve this beautiful ivory statue of like his perfect ideal woman. And he prays to the goddess Aphrodite to send him a bride, like his ivory girl. And then Aphrodite takes pity on him and brings his statue to life. And the story ends with like, and they get married and lived happily ever after. And, my approach to that from a modern lens and from, the lens of someone writing about girls and about women primarily, was obviously, like, how did the statue feel about that? Like the idea of this object brought to life purely to be someone's wife and purely to fulfill, this man's needs, like a creator's needs. It got me thinking a lot about that kind of story and about similar themes in other ancient stories. And especially because I'm writing from a queer perspective, like about lesbian characters. I was also thinking about portrayals of lesbians in archaic stories. Because like, despite Sappho, like these instances of Sappho and like all of these blah, 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 there actually really is not a lot of, like actual, like, we know for sure that this story was about lesbians, because
They were roommates.
yeah, exactly. Like, it's just like, either they get gal palled or like, when people were writing these things like 2000 years ago in archaic Greece and other places, in the Western world, like they were just sort of not interested in the world of women. Like most of the writers, and certainly the writers with any sort of platform, were men, and they were writing about like men. And, if they wrote about queerness, it was male queerness. And like, ancient Greece is obviously famous for this. And there just sort of was not a lot of insight into the personal and intimate lives of women, because they just kind of weren't of interest to these writers in like an ancient patriarchal society. And so I have like a little author's note about this, like short and for middle schoolers, in the back of the book. And so I was kind of hoping that could spark discussion points of like, how do you, like, what's the difference between, or like when you're reading old stories and ancient mythologies, especially because middle school is when you start to study mythologies and stuff like that. Like how interesting it is to approach it from a modern lens and think about like how you would translate this story to something that makes more sense to you, or something that reflects your own experiences. And yeah, I just had a lot of, cause I had a lot of fun translating it into this modern, like, children's story. And I had a lot of fun doing the research and learning more about this and learning more about the world where the original story was set and how I was going to translate that to a fantasy world. So I think, yeah, it'd be really cool if parents could talk about that, like translating myths to modern day, or like, what's your favorite fairy tale? Like if you had to, adapt that fairy tale to be about, someone more like you, like what would you do? Like what would that story be about? What is it about this ancient story that fascinates you, or makes you like especially interested in this one mythology? Because, that's also like just another great window into learning more about storytelling in general, is studying what people have been doing for thousands of years. And then also, I think like another major theme in this story is the gods, and how, especially, coming from Greek mythology, one of the major tenets of Greek mythology is that the gods were very human. Like they're kind of essentially like human, but more, where they're not perfect. They're not, flawless. They're not like necessarily kind or giving or anything. It's not that kind of God. Like they're petty, and they, do horrible things, and they like treat mortals as playthings and da da da. And so it's really fun to bring those themes in as well, and explore how, these supposedly all-powerful gods are actually not much of a match for a group of sixth graders, who, are trying to stop them from hurting other mortals and treating people like objects, and treating people like they don't matter. Yeah.
When I was
That'd be fun.
around that age, I was addicted to retellings of old like myths and gods and stuff. Like,
oh yeah, we all grew up on
Jackson.
Percy Jackson.
Yeah, I was into the Red Pyramid series too. I could get my hands on. So this is definitely gonna be popular with. Oh, I feel like such an old person. I'm like with the young kids these days.
I know. I literally keep saying kids these days, and I mean it, in a good way, like an honorary way. But it is so funny to say because I feel so old.
Gosh, well, now I feel old too. God.
Now we just both feel old. Great.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we were able to end this podcast on a crisis.
Yeah.
So
You know what? Aging is a gift. I was just watching The Last of Us, this past weekend, and they had that great line about how, getting older means we're still here. And so that's what I think about whenever I start spiraling. Like, getting older means that we're still here. And it means that there's, we're still growing and learning and doing all those cool human things. It's good to be getting older.
I asked you if you saw the new episode of Last of Us, because that was...
Oh, yeah, and I cried for like 20 minutes. Yeah. Yep. I was weeping. So beautiful. Yeah, I loved it. So good.
Well, I think we unfortunately need to wrap up now, as much as I would love to analyze that episode. But if someone wanted to find more of your work, where would they go to find that? Do you have a website?
Yes. Yeah, you can find me at, my website is ninavarela.com, just same as my name on the book cover. My Twitter is Nina Varelas with an S at the end, because Nina Varela is actually a very common name in any Spanish speaking country. So there's a lot of us. So Nina Varelas with an S on the end. And then my Instagram is Nina Varelas with an S and then an underscore. So it's all under that umbrella. But then obviously you can find all of those links at ninavarela.com on my website, and also a link to By Juniper Harvey if you're so inclined.
All right. Well, thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you to everyone for listening, and be sure to check out Juniper Harvey and The Vanishing Kingdom.
Thank you so much. This is amazing. Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast, and we hope we'll see you in the next exciting episode of the podcast. Until then, want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guest, Nina Varela. Please be sure to check out Juniper Harvey and The Vanishing Kingdom. Also want to thank our co-host, Jordan Sahley. Want to thank the rest of our team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Stephanie Davila, Will Sheaver, Cassandra Masonet. Want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.